move on to our next discussion, and which is the digital state. And I have the pleasure of welcoming this morning Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, former Chairman, Competition Commission of India. Our chief guest of the day for this session, Mr. Ashok Kumar Gupta, Chairperson, Competition Commission of India. Mr. Junaid Ahmed, Country Director, World Bank, India. And our chairman, Mr. Sameer Kochar.
Now, India has had a remarkable digital journey. You know, our digital India scheme started off somewhere in 2003. Actually, it was earlier called National E-Governance Plan. And only in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came in, it was given a new direction called Digital India. And after that, the speed and scale of digitalization is the stuff that legends are made of. A lot of population scale infrastructure has already been put in place, and India is at the least got the the plumbing in place for putting more and more stuff uh, and make it easily accessible to citizens digitally. In 2016, I had edited a book called Modi's Odyssey, Digital India, Developed India. That book was a collection of essays by sectoral experts who laid out a path for national program after national program, how digital India is going to be integrated, how Aadhaar is going to be integrated, what kind of payment systems are we likely to have, so on and so forth. It laid out a path for India from 2016 to 2019. Now that transformation has been remarkable. This book had returned 61 recommendations. Practically all of them have found place in some national scheme or the other. As is in the journey of any nation, you know, digital India is also an evolution. It cannot be a revolution. So now's the time to look back, take stock of, you know, the ground that we've covered and where we are headed. So looking back, we find that today we have a problem of plenty. Each ministry has got a lot of applications. These applications are standalone apps. They don't talk to each other. The government itself is not connected. So, you know, you will find that the same citizen is possibly getting benefit from 3 different ministries. So the government does not have a one citizen view for being very, targeted intervention in terms of how to help. And this problem is compounded further by the federal structure. How do you get the central government and the state government to have one citizen view? Similarly, the problem is reversed from the citizen's perspective. I still deal with too many governments. There is no one input for Sameer Kochar where I can, go and deal with these governments. So we find that the next step of digital India is going to take into account all of these things, and we are headed towards what we call a connected government, wherein these silos will be broken. There will be a huge amount of connectivity at the back end as well as at the front end. Now, this will bring together a new host of challenges, privacy being one, fundamental rights being another, federal structure, how to juxtapose that uh, is yet another. Would these be working on counter purposes? So I recall when National E-Governance Plan itself was launched, and there was a very increased role of private sector envisaged within that. There were talks that this is a World Bank driven thing, and we are going to give away the governance function to private sector, so on and so forth. Till it was clarified that what is the sovereign function. You cannot the process cannot be the sovereign function. So if you separate out process, and within that the 2 or 3 things which are sovereign acts, then there is no contradiction really. You can actually bring in the efficiencies and the scales and sustainability into these models. And today we find that there is hardly any erosion of sovereignty, so to say, even with such a high degree of digitalization. So I would be very hopeful and feel that similarly there is hardly going to be any erosion in either the federal structure or any other thing in India if we are going towards a connected government. Now, Modi ji had given this call for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Many have viewed it as a wall to keep competition out, yet others are building highways from India to Europe or to America to talking about India outwards globalization. So what is this Atmanirbhar Bharat? Rather than getting into the philosophical debate of whether it is a Swadeshi call, or it's a closed economy call, or it's an outward globalization call. I think it's the end result that matters. And I think the end result of Atmanirbhar Bharat has to be Atmanirbhar growth. Atmanirbhar growth is a growth which is job generative. It is a growth that is spatially dispersed. It is a growth that is equitable. And finally, it is a growth that is sustainable, because we just have to deal with the climate change issue, whether we like it or we do not. Now, to all of these objectives, connected government then becomes a very important leg. And the second important leg is India becoming a $1 trillion digital economy by 2025, as envisaged by the Prime Minister of India. Now, within that, I think one area where we have been sorely lacking is the legislative and the regulatory framework. It's been too late in the coming. Probably it's a blessing in the sense that we'll have a more mature version than other countries, but that regulatory framework has to come in, and that architecture has to be walking in sync with administrative reforms, which have not happened so far. So we've had a huge wave of digitalization, but we haven't had the administrative reforms to go with it. So if you look at the biggest success stories, it is only where the administrative reform came in was Digital India a huge success, like direct benefit transfer is a case in point. MCA is a case in point. Tax computerization is yet another case in point. So if you look at the new legislation that's coming in, like the new education policy, the new farm laws, I think some of these offer very rich grounds for building the new digital India. Also, there are reforms that we're working on, which is dematerialization of land and property. Could that unlock a lot of value? Could that ease credit flows? Could that change India and put it into a much higher growth economic trajectory and yet remain equitable? And within that, what is going to happen to our small and micro enterprises? Because digitalization can very easily create monopolies, and it can create predatory, or it can vitiate the level playing field. So this is the reason why we've set up this conference today, and I'm glad to have with us as the first speaker Mr. Ashok Kumar Gupta, who's in very interesting times heading CCI. And sir, if you'd like to share your views on how do you see emerging competition landscape in India, more so in the view of a digital state when everything getting digitalized, how will the competition pan out?
Thank you, Mr. Kochar. Dear friends, as we are all aware, digitization has transformed and revolutionized the Indian economy. India is now the second fastest economy amongst the 17 leading economies in the world. India's digital economy generates about $200 billion of economic value annually. And this would further increase to about fivefold, that is $1 trillion by 2025. Indeed, the new economy with its extensive use of digital technology has outcompeted the pipeline-based economy by mobilizing resources and scaling at a pace which traditional firms cannot match. However, technology now allows these firms to compile and refine information into a more useful finished product, allowing them to protect their position by creating an ecosystem comprising multiple portals among which users can easily switch. Building of such ecosystems intensifies the likelihood of increased entry barriers, market concentration, and reduced innovation. These firms play an intermediation role between various enterprises, have access to large and unique data sets, and are able to move into adjacent markets either through acquisitions or by having access to sensitive business data of other market players on their platforms. This situation is complicated further if the entity controlling a platform also transacts upon it, thereby operating in dual capacity. These characteristics of such online platforms have corresponding concerns for SMEs listed on such platforms as well. In the past few years, a few digital ecosystems and players have emerged as gateways to the internet with bottleneck power. They act as a first touch point for a consumer's transaction journey, and it is through their ranking logic of search results and advertisements that an online firm seller's visibility is determined. At the same time, we all have enjoyed the services provided by such ecosystems. They integrate a wide range of products and services which can lead to efficiencies and reduced prices. It also enhances consumer experience as it offers demand side synergies across a bouquet of products and services and creates convenience. Clearly, the effect is ambiguous and makes the application of competition rules extremely challenging. Application of competition rules requires some out-of-box thinking, finding an optimum solution that would help in preserving, restoring, and facilitating competition in the digital space becomes fundamental here without compromising on consumer welfare. The antitrust field, which is a combination of economic doctrines and legal principles, can help in designing analytical frameworks and insights on the competitive dynamics of business ecosystems for regulating the same. Another issue with digital markets is how to account for data related effects. Data has acquired crucial importance for gaining market power on the internet. The challenge is to determine whether the data sets so integrated are unique, complementary, and cannot be replicated. Mere accumulation of data does not confer market power as long as it is non-rivalrous and there is free flow. Although collection and control of data are not per se anti-competitive, however, data sharing as a merger remedy or remedies that encourage interoperability and portability may become necessary, especially when the merger combines specialized user data. The Competition Act empowers the CCI to impose remedies both in case of mergers and acquisitions as well as in case of anti-competitive practices such as abuse of dominance. Specifically, behavioral remedies are now being widely put to use in the digital sector and may include provision of access to data in order to curb what I may say data police. Interestingly, unassayed control over data by these gatekeeper firms comes due to weak and loose privacy policies that compromise individual privacy to a level that they are able to collect troves of data for unfair commercial exploitation. The antitrust law framework is broad enough to address the exploitative and exclusionary behavior arising out of private standards of entities commanding market power. Privacy can take the form of non-price competition. Lowering of privacy protection by dominant enterprises could be construed to be an abuse of dominant position as low privacy standards imply a reduction in consumer welfare. Lower data protection can also lead to the standard legal category of exclusionary behavior, which undermines the competitive process. Tying with other digital products further strengthens the data advantage enjoyed by dominant incumbent by cross-linking the data collected across services, creating a vicious circle. CCI is closely scrutinizing such data privacy concerns now. We also acknowledge that sound and informed decision making needs a thorough understanding of the nature of competition in the digital markets. Market studies are an important tool for an evidence-based approach to antitrust policy and for providing a comprehensive understanding of the market dynamics. For us, market studies inform enforcement decisions and aid our advocacy efforts. The Commission has therefore included market studies as an important constituent of its toolkit. Most of our recent market studies have been prompted by changes in competition landscapes due to technological advancements and digitization of markets. For instance, the market study on e-commerce was launched as the Commission had been receiving lots of cases relating to this particular sector. What also became apparent in the course of the enforcement activities was that the distribution architecture for a large number of goods and services was undergoing a shift at a rapid pace. A need was felt to develop an understanding of these changes from all relevant perspectives. The study findings showed that imbalance in bargaining power information asymmetry between platforms and their business users, and lack of platform neutrality underpinned most of the emerging issues in e-commerce. While these issues merit case-by-case assessment under the different provisions of the Competition Act, bargaining power imbalance and information asymmetry between e-commerce marketplace platforms and their business users were found to be at the core of many issues. Thus, without a formal determination of violation of competition law, we felt that improving transparency over certain areas of the platform's functioning could reduce information asymmetry and could have a positive influence on competition outcomes. These infirmities were more amenable to be addressed through non-enforcement tools. So under our advocacy mandate, we urged the e-commerce platforms to take self-regulatory measures to improve transparency over certain areas such as search ranking, action use sharing of data, user review mechanism, revision in contract terms, and discount policy. We all know that telecom industry lies at the core of the digital revolution. After completion of the e-commerce study, a need was felt to study the unfolding competition dynamics in the telecom sector. The study findings indicate that technology convergence has enthused vertical integration in telecom industry across the infrastructure and content value chain and led to forging strategic partnerships between telecom operators and digital solutions providers, including content providers, e-commerce platforms, digital payment platforms, and other cloud-based technology solutions. The challenge for us here is to isolate instances of market abuse to the detriment of competition. Therefore, whether the service provider indulges in a discriminatory treatment has to be ascertained on a case-by-case basis, and going forward, the role of competition authorities will increase in assessing the impact of these newly emerging business models, with telecom operators acting as platforms to various applications ranging from entertainment to retail to payment systems, etc. In light of the move towards convergence, adherence to net neutrality principles will be instrumental in ensuring healthy competition as technology convergence drives further integration across the value chain. From a competition standpoint, there is a parallel to the principle of search neutrality that bars search engines from promoting their own businesses in response to queries. The CCI has to be vigilant that such vertically integrated infrastructure providers do not indulge in actions that could or have the potential to foreclose entry in the application layer. While net neutrality ensures that networks are neutral to platforms, the platform's operating systems dominated by a few players have to be open, inclusive, and non-discriminatory. Digitization is here to stay, and its indispensability for human development is unquestionable. The government has already recognized the paybacks of a digital economy and has aimed to improve online infrastructure, increase internet connectivity, and make India digitally empowered. It's our duty as a competition authority to assist in this endeavor by promoting competitive digital markets, both through enforcement and advocacy. We assure you that our approach in digital markets would be carefully crafted, nuanced, and minimalist so that we do not lose the efficiencies or stifle the innovation incentives of the digital firms. We do not want to throw the baby with the bathwater. With these words, I end my address and thank the organizers, particularly Mr. Samir Kochhar, for giving me this platform to share my views. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ashokji. That was very lucid insights into what's going on. It would be wonderful if your office could just mail us this text, because we'd like to really widely circulate this and disseminate this information.
Sure,
And early next week, I'll be calling upon you with Mr. Dhanendra Kumar. If you have the time, you can physically hand over his award to him, and I can share some thoughts firsthand.
Okay,
and with that, we move on to Junaid. Junaid, the growth and digital India. What do you think?
Samirji, thank you. Ashokji, very powerful statement. I've learned a lot from what you've said. Interestingly, I think I'm going to reflect back what Ashokji said and what you said, Samirji, perhaps in a slightly different way, but it really reflects many of the important words that you shared. I'm going to refer to work done by Steve Denning, who used to be at the World Bank, who is now a thought leader in the world. And he draws on the work, I think it's a work that was published in 1996 by Nicholas Negroponte. It was probably the first comprehensive book which sort of argued about the change in the world because of the digital world, and it was called Being Digital. So both Steve Denning and Negroponte, I think, raised certain important themes that I see reflected in what we are seeing around the world, and in particular in India. You know, let's just step back for a second and recognize what a monumental shift we have seen across the decades. You know, we started off with the agricultural revolution, which animal power became the source of the transformation of agriculture. But one of the things about the agricultural revolution was we were stuck where we were. Besides some ships moving around the world wasn't connected. Then you moved into the industrial era. And the industrial era, with the arrival of steam, of oil and electricity, went into what I call the world of atoms, right? The atoms connected us all over the world, and mobility just skyrocketed, not only from the development of canals, as Steve Denning points out, but the movement of cars and airplanes and trains, significant shift to atoms. And now, shift from atoms into bytes. And the shift from atoms into bytes is completely changing our world. Now, there are three areas that we are used to when we look at this shift into the world of bytes. One is infrastructure, and from issues of fiber links to other types of infrastructure that helps the digital world. So, big story on infrastructure. Countries around the world have been putting a lot of money, India included. Then comes the second part, which is converting this infrastructure investment in digital into services. And here you have some fascinating examples which were referred to by Samir ji and by Ashok ji. One is in the context of the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, is the delivery of direct cash transfers to women-headed households. What an incredible story that is. And so here, what you see is the use of digitization into reaching those parts of communities that may be left out of the markets, right? And so direct benefit transfer has been a major story of digitization. But the other is in the world of education. And when pandemic hit and everyone had to shut down, you couldn't stop education. And we're still yet to understand the loss of human capital during pandemic. But the arrival of digital world enabled us to take education into the homes. Diksha, which India has introduced, both as teacher training, teacher formation, but also students themselves, including their parents. This is a very different world of human capital preservation, and digital world has made a difference. Third, I would say, is something which is extremely important, is how digital world enables us to reach into informality. Small and medium enterprises, the migrant worker, huge story that these are platforms of economic growth of India. And if you don't link into informality, you're unable to capture the vibrant productivity of India. I think we all talk about converting informality into formality. Fair enough, and that's a good issue. I look at it slightly differently. I look at it as saying, how do you infuse productivity across your economy, whether you're in the informal sector or you're in the formal sector? And digital world enables us to do that. And here, the examples of being able to put small and medium enterprises onto platforms, being able to put a platform that actually shows what kind of receivables that MSMEs still are owed, and using those receivables as collateral for them to be able to get access to money. This would not have been possible without a digital world. And we're we're beginning to infuse productivity into the MSME, whether they're in the informal sector or the formal sector, through the digital world. But the other, I think, fundamental to an economic growth story, especially in a world where we have entered shocks and uncertainty, is can you create a social protection system that supports your economy? It protects people and it protects firms and enterprises. And during this pandemic, we saw India beginning to pivot its social protection system from a very powerful rural-based social protection, Manrega being an example, into now ensuring social protection to informal sector, social protection to the urban sector, social protection that's portable for the migrants, and social protection that deals with the federal system of India, where NDMA can open a window during a shock, money goes into the hands of the states, states are able to use that money into their own social protection systems, right? Putting social protection in a federal system, not possible without a digital world, right? That's how things are changing. But we know about the infrastructure and we're learning about these services. Where I think the challenge we face, and this is the point that Steve Denning makes, when the industrial age came on, it took a while for the industrial age to really deliver on the productivity. And his argument was, it took a while for firms to change their method of management and leadership to respond to the industrial age. So this whole notion of firm organization, hierarchy, top-down management, all of that, you know, the firm and how the firm works. We talk about the Ford motor cars. That whole change in management was needed to capture the benefits of the industrial era. The challenge today is that the digital era has to change the way firms manage themselves. Today's firms no longer can adopt the industrial era of management, top-down systems of management, control hierarchy to do production. You now need firms to have a far more, how shall I say, innovative, self-propelling leadership that's spread across the firm, and that requires a very different management structure. So you look at companies like Apple and Google that we are trying to figure out their role in the digital world. They've changed completely their management structures, whereas GE has not changed its management structure. So the productivity of the digital world are fundamentally different in a very different setup in management systems. And I think one of the challenges that we face in growing the economy is, are our private sector firms changing their management system? And in our part of the world, I'm from Bangladesh, but in South Asia, moving from, how shall I say, family-based firms to firms that are competitive internally, which allows leadership to emerge from inside the firm, where changes happen at the mid-management level, not driven by the top, is an entirely different way of functioning. And that method of functioning, according to Steve Denning, is what will really capture the productivity of the digital era. But let's take that storyline from the private sector and convert it into the public sector. State capability. In a digital world, how civil services run, how state capability is done changes. And I think that this is going to be another area of fundamental change. Unless civil services in our part of the world change in the way they work, you are not going to get state capability emerging that captures the full power of the digital age. So I gave examples of DBT, of Diksha in education, of reaching informality through digital services. I would argue that that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Ayushman Bharat, the Prime Minister's push to create a health insurance for everyone, And you're beginning to see the power of that in the digital world. But for that to really achieve the type of revolution that happened when Ford Motor Company changed its way of delivering, we're going to need a completely different mode of civil service management and state capability. And I think that the Prime Minister's Karma Yogi initiative of rethinking civil service and its management, I think, is related to this digital world. And until that changes, you're not going to take the power of the digital world into public services. So I think that in Sameerji, in bringing together all of us, I think you've brought some very important strands of thinking. I think in the Competition Commission and the world of competition, the linkage between digital and creating a competitive economy is absolutely one of the biggest storylines that's there. And Ashokji laid out the principles of that. I think the other part is in the public sector, and the public sector changing its way of functioning to actually take on the power of the digital world. And that requires rethinking civil service, that requires rethinking the way state capability is measured and delivered. If that happens, you're going to see digital revolution truly taken to the next level. Thank you very much for giving me the time to share these words. Over to you, Sameerji.
Pleasure, Junaid. These are very, very important thoughts. In fact, I am now editing this book called The Digital State. And I'm hoping that some of these lectures that are happening during this conference, these could be your initial, building blocks. And if you could just develop them and make it into a paper, it would be a wonderful addition to the book, both from you as well as Ashokji. And now I call upon Mr. Dhanendra Kumar to share his thoughts on competition in the digital state. You're on the mute again.
Chief guest of the day, Mr. Ashok Gupta ji, my distinguished friend Junaid, the host for the event, Sameer ji, Gurusharan ji, distinguished friends joining us for this event, ladies and gentlemen. I have no words to thank Mr. Sameer Kochhar and Scotch Foundation for bestowing on me this unique honor, this prestigious award, and also no words to thank Mr. Ashok Gupta, the present chairman CCI, and Mr. Junaid Ahmed for their generous words and blessing me at this occasion, which means a lot to me. It was exactly 12 years ago, almost to the day, when I joined as first chairman of CCI on my return from the World Bank, where I worked as India's executive director, and the presence of both of them, the CCI chairman and the World Bank country director, today at this historic moment, as far as I'm concerned, means a lot to me. Soon after my joining, several friends asked me, hey, congratulations, you got a new job. By the way, what do you do? It was quite a job to explain the role of the Competition Commission and undertake the competition advocacy, what it means to them. In fact, Mr. Sameer Kochhar mentioned to me about my friend Arvind Panagaria also, and he was good enough to write an editorial during those days, which was published in Economic Times, if I may mention, explaining the role of Competition Commission. So during those days, my friends in business and industry told me that we had had enough mothers-in-law, while the government had to add another mother-in-law to breathe down our neck constantly. I had a hard time to convince them, going around the country in meetings and explaining to them that this mother-in-law is very affectionate, very caring, and you would be benefited by her presence. If you look at the preamble of the competition law, it talks about protecting the interest of consumers and ensuring the freedom of trade. And since everybody in industry and business in the entire value chain is a consumer, either of intermediate goods or services or both, therefore they stand to benefit from the reduced cost and better quality through competition. It would also ensure that they have a level playing field and freedom of trade, and their innovation could flourish. It goes to the credit of my successor chairman and my erstwhile colleagues in the CCI, and especially the present chairman CCI, Mr. Ashok Gupta, who is handling this job at a very difficult time when the country has passed through this pandemic recently and still struggling with it, that CCI has come to its present level when it is reckoned among the top competition jurisdictions in the world. Later, I was also privileged to chair a committee to draft national competition policy. It is actually a toolkit which refers to the various policies, regulations, and guidelines, in fact, the thinking of the government to promote efficiencies through competition, to provide greater choice and an empowerment of the consumers. It is actually a broader and generic term which encompasses competition law too. And as Mr. Ashok Gupta referred, they've undertaken a series of studies. They've undertaken a very good study on e-commerce, another study on telecom, and yet another on pharmaceuticals. All three are very, very important sectors. And the studies bring out the various competition and market issues in these sectors. And I'm sure this is an ongoing process. As far as today's discussion is concerned, I would like to refer to 4 landmarks, starting from the first landmark, the political freedom in 1947, when the country got free from the political dominance of the British. Then the economic freedom of 1991 from the strict license and quota regime, which started off with the liberalization in 91. Competition was brought in the market. Various sectors were opened up for private sector, and competition law and policy were sought to be introduced, where both public and private sector were at par in the eyes of competition law under section 2H of the competition law, if I may say. Even the government departments in their economic functions are brought at par before the Competition Commission. So now the CCI has been imposing penalties even on public sector like Coal India, insurance companies, and others for any anti-competitive behavior. Today we are at the cusp of history. We have a unique demographic advantage when the average age of India is only 29. 70% of the Indians are below 32 years. So what we have today is an aspirational India bubbling with energy, enthusiasm, and new ideas. Digitalization is providing them new tools. The next big moment of freedom, the third watershed I am referring to, came with the advent of technology, when the Modi government brought in a number of schemes and programs under the Digital India in 2015 based on digitalization. These were designed to empower the common citizen and ensure that the benefits of the various government schemes and programs do actually reach them. Digitalization actually lowers entry barriers, allows marketing, and also to the common man empowers with new choices. So in the transfer of these money, these funds and resources without any leakages and route, what has happened? Let us look at it. We are reminded when the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi referred to leakage of substantial amount of money and route, only 15 paise reached the common man, to the beneficiary. For example, now in 351 schemes of 51 ministries, a system was introduced of sending money directly to the beneficiaries through the Jan Dhan account, Aadhaar, and mobile, called the JAM Trinity. This new mechanism of direct cash transfer saved more than rupees 1,70,000 crore rupees from leakages, pilferages, and falling into the hands of middlemen and bogus beneficiaries. In the last 6 years, during 13 lakh crores have been disbursed to the beneficiaries' accounts under the DBT Direct Bank Transfer Scheme. In 2020-21, rupees 2.1 lakh crores were sent directly to their accounts under various schemes such as Manrega, PDS, Public Distribution System, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, etc. In Manrega, since job cards and accounts of the laborers were linked to Aadhaar, a large number of bogus beneficiaries were caught. More than 6 lakh bogus laborers were weeded out from the scheme and rupees 25,000 crores were saved. So in all, the digitalization and this gem trinity resulted in the actual genuine beneficiaries getting the money and getting the value for each rupee which the government was spending. In other words, there was a saving, if I can count, of something like 66,000 crores even in the government ration distribution, in the elimination of 3 crore bogus beneficiaries and others. India is a classic example where digitalization has been introduced in the implementation of most government programs with more than 38 crore Jan Dhan accounts, 100 crore Aadhaar and 100 crore mobile. Now I come to the fourth landmark event, which is not exactly counted so far, but I'll refer to it as this. During the Corona pandemic, it was the digital economy which saw us through. It was the digitization, the various applications which sailed us through the pandemic period with work from home, e-commerce, digital transactions, schooling online, medical consultations, nearly everything online, even the travel online. In fact, as they say, every crisis brings an opportunity, and this was one with new innovations. And this decade is therefore rightly called Techade, technical decade, Techade. It has been estimated that COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the pace of digital transformation by 6 to 12 months. And now this 2021 is expected to be a year of growth and deep impact. IMF estimates our growth next year would be 11.5%, OECD 12.6%, Moody's 12.5%, all being highest in the world. This is India's year. India's vaccine rollout is considered to be India's gift to the world in combating this deadly virus by top scientists and world leaders. And if I can sound to be a little parochial, while a number of advanced countries are hoarding vaccines or are booking advance orders, India has been one of those believing in their Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, who have been sending their vaccines to the neighboring countries, in fact, 70 other countries. And in many countries, there have been boards and placards thanking India, like in Buckingham Palace outside and many other countries. I have seen those photographs. Look at our digital state and economy and how competition policy, since this was the theme, can propel the growth. In India, now there is a mature institutional and regulatory framework for a digital state, but with too many stand-alone applications, both of center and state governments in our federal setup. These applications are implemented by various agencies and functions in silos. While all of them are immensely useful and have indeed saved enormous wastages of resources, but created a web of frameworks and structures where a unified citizen-centric competitive model could be considered useful. There is need of keeping the face of the citizen in focus all the time. In fact, to recall the words of the Mahatma Gandhi, who said in his famous talisman, keep the poorest of the poor in front of your eyes in designing any such policy in an integrated manner. For a citizen, there should always be a mechanism by which he should be able to see on a screen by inserting his Aadhaar number or whatever other details may be required, the convergence under JAM and his various entitlements under health, it was referred Ayushman, the Swasthya Yojana, education, ration, and other facilities, including the crop insurance, and you name any other scheme, there are hundreds of such schemes. Both of the central and the state agencies, and how and best to avail them. So that would be real facility for him to have access, to know how to and when to avail those benefits. There should be maximization of efficiencies from his viewpoint, both in terms of money, saving of time, and ease of living, which should all be possible. It's not difficult, which is being done, in fact, through technologies. Wherever possible, there should be increased competition instead of working in silos to increase choices for him with easy availability and access, as I rightly said, as I initially said, choice and access is the buzzword for competition to empower him. For example, today he can have a better choice of goods and services through e-commerce, say from Flipkart, Amazon, or any other brick or mortar stores. He can make payments of his bills or transfer money online through banking channels, UPI, Paytm, Freecharge, you name so many of them. He can make booking of his train tickets through various web portals like Make My Trip and many others, make bookings even through IRCTC and other channels, and likewise of buses or air. He can see his bank accounts or status of insurance policies 24/7 sitting at home. He can get copies of his land records or any certificates online, and that is his new empowerment in the digital state. The possibilities are immense. In fact, even in the vaccination program, which is truly urgent and time-bound, why can't we have multiple options available to citizens? Why can't we have private sector being involved in a big way and introduce competition in providing jabs to the citizens across the country? It is critical that we cover the entire eligible population speedily as the pandemic is again raising its ugly head. And as the health minister said today, of course, one has to view the situation dynamically all the time, depending on the situation, which keeps on changing all the time. The government has taken a number of measures for digital empowerment.
Narendraji, we are about 20 minutes behind now. So if you could kindly...
I'll just wind up. I'll just take 2 minutes or 1 minute if you permit.
1 minute.
To spread digital infrastructure and digital literacy under the BharatNet project, broadband connectivity has been rolled out all over the country in all the 2.5 lakh gram panchayats and covered even the 6 lakh uninhabited villages. Then the cost of data has come down to the world's lowest, rupees 10.5 per GB, 1/10 of Britain's and 1/15 of the US. Internet and broadband penetration in India have kept very rapid pace. Total broadband connections have reached 75 crores. Now there is a real and full digital empowerment of the common citizens across the country. India has a unique advantage at the moment with its 135 crore population to generate in their digital applications humongous amount of data, and with the application of the artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on, it is estimated that this can open up new applications for the world. It can add $13 trillion for the world economy in the next 15 years. And for India, it can add in its GDP 1.3 percentage points every year. Friends, I've run out of my time as cautioned by Mr. Samir Kochhar. I really have no words to thank Mr. Samir Kochhar, Scotch Foundation, my distinguished colleague, Mr. Ashok Gupta, and my very dear friend, Junaid Ahmed. I will treasure this award bestowed on me. And as I said, I dedicate it to my colleagues in the CCI. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dharendraji. I wish there was more time. It was such an interesting conversation. Thank you, Ashokji. Thank you, Junaid. And I look forward to keeping in touch and meeting you again.